December 20th, 1944. Bastogne, a crossroads of frost and stone. Hauptmann Karl Weiss watched his fuel ledger bleed minutes while an engine rhythm arrived down the road that did not answer to his maps. A cold scrape of steel, a periscope rim rimmed with frost. Radio static cleared into a staff voice and then fell away. Gloved fingers counted rounds as if counting breaths. The log on the table listed two blunt figures. He trusted local fuel reserve, about 12,000 litres operational estimate, and an expected resupply window of 48 hours. Roads were a thread through orchards and hedgerows. Bridges were thin winter slick and liable to close on a thaw. The instruments told him what the map promised and what the timetable demanded, and then the instruments went quiet, leaving a space shaped like a question. B-roll, SFX periscope close-up, frost on metal, radio static, slow aerial push over Bastogne roads. The silence tightened like a clock. Hauptmann Karl Weiss, trained under the creed of precision, swore by the geometry of the 88 and the sanctity of aiming. His private oath: "We hold what craft lets us hold. If she breaks, we push another. No waiting, keep the road living." The ground is Ardennes hills and narrow lanes. The date pins the twilight of winter, and the German defensive plan is simple: deny roads, hold key junctions, conserve fuel measured in litres per hour, and make each shot count. But the logistical baseline is fragile fuel reserves of 10,000 to 15,000 litres operational estimate sit behind a few choke points. German time to repair for a heavy vehicle is measured in 6 to 12 hours, while Allied roadside patchwork averages 1 to 3 hours. Allied convoy throughput, even as an estimate, reads like a different language on the ledger: 40-60 trucks day, operational estimate, moving crude loads and crude men, each truck a replacement for a lost axle or a burned engine. Listen for it first as a thin thread under the scene, a distant metallic whoosh tires on wet road, the sound motif B appearing subtle and wrong-timed. That whoosh reframes the map movement as arithmetic, a steady supply rhythm that does not ask permission of terrain or of doctrine. He believed a single shot could decide. He was about to learn otherwise. Doctrine promised that a single perfected strike would reset order. Movement promised to drown the ledger in volume. The paragraph closes on that divergence: craft versus throughput, a single geometry of fire against a tide that did not respect geometry. They mocked it at headquarters as crude. A staff memo sighed that the Allies built many cheap things and taught men to fix them on the road. The barb was meant to sting. The sting missed the point. The Allied model was not an insult to engineering so much as a redesign of battlefield economics: produce more, accept loss, replace faster, and convert time into sustained presence. That conversion is math as much as muscle. Start with output. American wartime industry turned raw steel into thousands of serviceable trucks every month. Conservatively phrased as an operational estimate, Allied truck production measured in the thousands per month fed frontline convoys. In forward sectors, a working figure for convoy throughput is roughly 40 to 60 trucks per day to an active node. Each loaded truck in theatre carried on the order of 2,700 litres of fuel when counted as a bulk manifest item, illustrative manifest. Do the multiplication at 40 trucks per day. 40 times 2,700 equals 108,000 litres per day. At 60 trucks per day, 60 times 2,700 equals 162,000 litres per day. Over a 7-day window, that becomes 108,000 times 7 equals 756,000 litres, and 162,000 times 7 equals 134,000 litres. Those are simple, brutal volumes. Set those numbers against the German baseline we established in P1 local fuel reserves, measured in the low tens of thousands of litres. Operational estimates cluster around 10,000 to 15,000 litres held behind Bastogne's choke points. One can read the arithmetic plainly. A single day of Allied convoy deliveries at conservative throughput could equal 9 times the garrison's modest reserve. 108,000 divided by 12,000 gives 9, and a week of deliveries could multiply that advantage into the dozens. 756,000 divided by 12,000 gives 63. Even at the low end of Allied estimates and the high end of German stores, the order of magnitude gap is decisive. These are not metaphors. They are ratios that translate directly into hours of engine life, rounds fired, and time a gun crew can keep an observation post alive. Production meant more than fuel. The deuce-and-a-half GMC truck was simple by design, easy to manufacture, easy to field strip, and easy to patch with roadside ingenuity. Allied repair doctrine accepted 1 to 3 hours of roadside patchwork as normal. German heavy vehicle repair cycles averaged 6 to 12 hours for more complex fixes. The operational consequence is straightforward. An Allied truck disabled at 10 hours could be patched and back on the road by midday. A German heavy transporter disabled at 10 hours might still be in a repair yard at sunset. Throughput favored the side that treated failures as expected events to be absorbed and replaced. Thread the sound motif here. Let the whoosh return not as a novelty, but as a heartbeat under the math engines and tires and men moving in a steady metallic rhythm. Lay that SFX under the passage where manifest numbers are read aloud. The psychological effect is deliberate. The ear registers endless movement, the way the ledger registers endless liters. Small human scenes confirm the arithmetic. A captured civilian account, scratched on a scrap of paper, reads like a production log. We patched axles at the roadside men with coffee and hammers. Truck moves on. An Allied driver might later write, "If she breaks, we push another." A factory worker at the line put it bluntly, "We didn't make miracles, we made enough." Those voices are not propaganda, they are testimonies to a system whose primary currency was replacement. Visually, this chapter is factory and road, show stamping presses and rivet lines, then cut to a long-shot convoy threading hedgerows. Insert overlays trucks per day plotted against consumption, a supply curve rising, while consumption oscillates. Annotate the graph with repair hour markers, Allied 1-3 hours, German 6 to 12 hours. The viewer should feel how simple arithmetic becomes operational advantage. There is a tactical irony here. Precision weapons still perform. An 88 well-aimed disables 3 vehicles in a skirmish. But when the opponent can deliver dozens of replacements in a single day, the kill becomes an expense rather than a decisive act. Discipline. Absence of redundancy becomes brittle when opposed by volume and redundancy. At the micro level, individual skill still matters. At the operational level, it is rendered marginal by throughput. Numbers began to do the fighting they once left to skill. Availability outcompetes perfection because it converts production into presence. If you can replace losses faster than they can be inflicted, you convert attrition into momentum. In Bastogne, that conversion was not a theory. It was a ledger entry, a convoy manifest, and the grinding metallic whoosh that threaded through every night. B-roll cues factory assembly lines stamping steel, convoy longshot, close-ups of men changing tires and patching axles, overlay graph trucks day versus time with supply versus consumption curves. The 88 creaked into life like a promise, made audible a tight metallic breath taken by men who had practiced that motion until their bodies matched the instrument. Schmidt, the gunlayer, checked his quadrant, thumbed the elevation, and felt the cold give way to a single brutal focus. A line correct fire. The round left the muzzle with a clean concussive bark, an 88mm shell in a long precise arc, the parabolic geometry of its flight traced against a low grey sky. Time folded into tiny units, the seconds of fuse, the angle of descent, the way metal met steel. The first impact chewed a transport into a shuddering wreck. The second unmoored an axle. The third sent a spray of crates and canvas into the air. For 10 minutes, the world obeyed perfection. Vehicles disabled 3, a textbook engagement executed with the kind of grace that justified a lifetime of practice. For a half hour, morale rose. Men who had slept in frozen slit trenches smiled with the sharp pride of craftsmen. Their metric was immediate and clear: 1 well-placed battery volley, 3 enemy vehicles removed a tidy tally against an advancing stream. Sensory detail insisted on the moment: black smoke, the metallic tang of hot oil, the bright, clean smell of explosives. Schmidt's hands were steady, his breath measured. The ledger in the back of his mind subtracted 3 trucks and added 3 minutes of confidence. Then the road answered. A convoy, not a single spear, but a ragged, efficient tide, slid into view the way weather slides across a plain. Trucks halted, men spilled out with hammers and jacks. Roadside crews began to work with a practiced chaos. 1 disabled truck was dragged aside, its wheel respliced in under 2 hours. Another had a jury-rigged splint thrown across a broken leaf spring and rolled back into line within 90 minutes. By evening, men counted replacements. 10 trucks had cycled through that node in 24 hours, carrying fuel packs and a team of mechanics whose job was to make broken things run again. Put those figures in prosaic arithmetic. Mirror scene, metric disabled replacements in 24 hours, equal 310. Replacement ratio, equal 10. 3 equals 3.33 replacements per disabled vehicle. If one considers time to recover for an Allied truck, as between 1-3 hours median, 2.0 hours, and a German heavy transporter repair as 6-12 hours median, 9.0 hours. The operational consequence becomes obvious. An Allied truck disabled at 06 hours might be back on the road by roughly 08 hours. A German heavy transporter disabled at 06 hours will typically still be in a repair yard well after dusk. The math is simple and brutal. The enemy replaces capacity faster than it can be taken away. Saturation is not metaphor here, it is a working ratio. Present it in a small readable prose table. Local kill metric, 3 vehicles disabled. Allied replacements in 24H at 10 trucks. Replacement per loss, 3.33. Allied roadside patch time, 1-3 hours median, 2 hours. German heavy repair time, 6-12 hours, median 9 hours. When the denominator of your combat equation is so small and the numerator balloons with steady deliveries, that which counted as decisive becomes only an expense. Emotion tracks that arithmetic. Schmidt's pride withered into a grinding frustration at seeing his handiwork consumed. Each perfect burst now read like labor consumed rather than victory gained. The gun that had once decided a skirmish now required more shells, more crew effort, more precious diesel per effect, and the effect dissolved when the opponent treated losses as routine losses to be absorbed by throughput. Weiss watched his men repair, re-prepare, reload. He measured their breaths and equated them to minutes bought for the garrison. Minutes of life became a currency paid in liters and trucks rather than in aim and courage. Visuals underscore the lesson. Show the 88 in slow motion, the crew's practiced choreography, the shells travel the impact. Cut to a convoy montage, trucks pull up, drivers leap with burlap and wrenches, an axle is swapped in a roadside blur. Layer an infographic titled Saturation Ratio across the frame, disabled replaced per 24H, and annotate with median repair times. Use the sound motif B here as a thin undercurrent during the convoy montage, a metallic whoosh of tires and engines that contrasts with the crisp staccato crack of the 88. Let the ear do some of the argument. At the day's close, the tactical ledger is no longer a list of precision shots, but a record of consumed labor. Schmidt counts shells as inputs to a system that the enemy simply outfeeds. The more perfect his crew shoots, the more replacements the enemy sends. The more replacements the enemy sends, the more his precision becomes an account item rather than a strategic instrument. The battle logic flips excellence without redundancy is a consumable. The final line of this beat, his excellence now counted as labor consumed. The night the decision came down, the fog was a slow blade. Signals thinned to single-word bursts. The radio's voice became grain. The hedgerows swallowed shape. Motif B engines on wet roadways, a metallic whoosh grew from a thread into a tide, a steady mechanical insistence that threaded through the hours like a metronome. Men at listening posts counted between breaths. Weiss felt the rhythm in his teeth. An intercepted route overlay arrived on a scrap of paper. Hand-drawn arrows circled villages, a sequence of rotations annotated in ink. Intelligence noted route rotation windows, operational estimate at roughly every 12 to 18 hours. Translate that into movement. If convoys to the forward node run at 40 to 60 trucks per day, operational estimate, then each 12-hour rotation brings about 20-30 trucks through the corridor. Each 18-hour rotation brings about 30-45 trucks. In liters, using a working manifest figure of 2,700 LLs per truck, illustrative manifest, a 12-hour rotation yields roughly 54,000, 81,000 liters delivered to the node. An 18-hour rotation yields roughly 81,000, 121 to 500 liters. Those are not abstractions, but pulses, fuel, and men arriving in chunks that refilled the clock Weiss thought he controlled. The map showed multiple corridors kept open by rotation and by casualty acceptance. The Allies did not aim to finish a convoy with perfection, they accepted attrition as part of throughput. If one corridor clogged, another took over within a rotation. If a truck burned, another arrived within hours. That was the operational idea, writ small across inked arrows and scribbled times. Weiss had a simple calculus in his head: hold the lane, make each shot count, ration fuel, so the guns could sing at precision. The order he issued, phrased into the cold air with professional calm, violated that calculus. Ration rounds on Sector 3, he said aloud, and then added the line that tasted wrong even as it left his mouth. Abandon observation post Delta at 0200. Collapse to secondary ridge to preserve fuel and ammunition. The command was surgical in syntax, but heretical in spirit. His private oath, we hold what craft lets us hold, was a vow to stand where skill and discipline could hold position. The new order required retreating from a position they had fortified for weeks. The room smelled of hot oil and old wool. Welding torches from a maintenance tent sputtered like distant breath. The men who heard the order obeyed with the same mechanical discipline they had brought to aiming boots, unhooked tarpaulins, rolled chargers bagged. But obedience did not erase the moral shape of the act. Weiss felt a heavy nausea that was not hunger. He wrote the order down in his own hand, and then later in the privacy of a dim shelter, he set down a line in his diary, in the present tense. I sign the paper that tells my men to leave a post we made with our hands. I order retreat. My oath tastes like burnt paper. The sentence is short, the shame is long. Unit consequences were immediate and specific. Observation Post Delta, manned by Unteroffizier Müller and 6 men, had a ring of wire, a small camouflaged pit, and a direct line of sight over a crossroads. By 02:30, the pit was empty. The clay cups of coffee had cooled, the periscope was down. The enemy's forward observer denied the view shifted firing arcs, and a battery that had been relying on Delta's eyes lost 1 hour of accurate registration. That hour equated in Weiss's ledger to an increase of 4 to 6 shells, fired to find the correct impact, a literal consumption of rounds that their rationing had tried to prevent. The tactile details are small and brutal. A welder crouched under a truck in the fog flame, licking a new splice into a leaf spring. His gloves were wet and his breath came in clouded bursts. A driver cradled a wrench like a weapon and pounded until a bolt surrendered. The smell of hot oil and solder and the copper tang of spent cordite filled the air. The men patched and rolled and moved on. Weiss watched a corporal wrap a canvas around a damaged radio and felt the weight of compromise in his chest. He had trained crews to value the quality of a job done by a master's hand. Now he watched them perform quick, pragmatic fixes that were more like bandages than craft. The operational arithmetic gnawed at him. Allied forward node supply density again, operational estimates could deliver on the order of 108,000 and 62,000 litres per day if convoys held to the 40 to 60 trucks day figure. German capacity to hold fuel behind the choke at Bastogne was measured in the low tens of thousands of litres. Operational estimates put local reserves near 10,000 to 15,000 litres. The contrast was stark. A single rotation could deliver multiples of what an entire garrison held in reserve. Where Weiss's doctrine assumed scarcity could be managed by precision, the reality presented a steady inflow that rewrote scarcity into abundance for the opponent. The sensory and moral pressure built to a small, quiet confession. In his diary later still, he recorded a fragment that read like a verdict: "They teach themselves to move. We were taught to be right. Right is not enough." The words were not theatrical. They were arithmetic and odor, and the grit of welds under nails. He felt the coincidence of his own hands trained to make instruments lethal, now working to disassemble the thing they had fortified. Map overlays and night vision convoy shots would dramatize this in film arrows, rotating in and out waves of headlights thrown across fog, the whoosh of tires amplified until the motif became a physical force under the image of his written order. Layer the motif B at peak intensity here. Let the sound press under the reading of the order and the close shot of Weiss's pen scrawling his name. Make the audience hear the arithmetic as much as see it. At the emotional crest, he ordered retreat. The oath tasted like burnt paper. The consequence is structural, not merely tactical. Precision applied without redundancy had become a consumable input in a system driven by throughput. The enemy's logistics, its willingness to accept losses and to rotate routes every 12 to 18 hours, rendered individual skill strategically irrelevant. Weiss had not been defeated by better aim or by courage. He had been outbid by the ledger. His shame was not the shame of failure in combat, but the deeper shame of discovering that the shape of war had changed, and that his lifelong argument for craft could not alone answer the new equation. Heeding the night's cold, Weiss found a shed that smelled of oil and old canvas and the faint sweet sour of sweat. A wooden crate served as a table. On it lay an allied toolbox, scuffed steel, a leather strap, a row of cheap sockets, and beside it a ledger, pages roughly torn, numbers penciled in by hand. He ran a thumb along the pencil marks. The paper rasped under his skin like a truth that would not be polished away. Touch frames thought here. The sockets were light, stamped with crude numbers. The wrench fit like an answer not meant for finesse. He picked up a socket, felt its imperfect edge, and rotated it against a bolt until the metal bit. The action was small, blunt, and intimate, a mechanical negotiation rather than an argument of art. The smell of hot oil rose when a mechanic nearby lit a torch. The heat fogged the low roof. It was in those moments, fingers on metal, breath clouding in the shed, that arithmetic and tactility met. Put the numbers on the table. Use the ledger like a scale. Take a working manifest figure for theatre movement, illustrative rather than archival, of 2,700 litres per truckload. If convoys sustain a throughput of 40 trucks per day, then daily delivered fuel is 40 times 2,740 times 2,700 equals 108,000 litres per day. 108,000 L a day. At 50 trucks per day, 50 times 2,700 equals 135,000 litres per day. 135,000 AL day. At 60 trucks per day, 60 times 2,700 equals 162,000 litres per day, 162,000 AL day. Extend that into a week. At 40 trucks day, 7 days, yields 108,000 times 7 equals 756,000 litres. At 50 trucks day, 135,000 times 7 equals 945,000 litres. At 60 trucks day, 162,000 times 7 equals 134,000 litres. Over 2 weeks, the numbers double, 112,000 litres at 40 trucks day, 190,000 litres at 50, 268,000 litres at 60. Against those volumes, the garrison stores the modest tens of thousands Weiss guarded are a different order. Operational estimates place local German reserves near 10,000 to 15,000 litres behind Bastogne's choke points. 1 day of conservative Allied delivery, 108,000 LA, is roughly 9 times a garrison's 12,000-litre reserve. 1 week at 50 trucks day, 945,000 LL, is nearly 100 times that reserve divided into days. But fuel is only part of the ledger. Consider replacement logic in vehicles. If an attacking force can sustain a replacement rate R of 50 trucks per day and an opposing interdiction loss rate, I is 15, disabled vehicles per day, then the replacements per loss equals EA divided by I50 divided by 15 equals 3.333.33 replacements for every disabled vehicle. In practical terms, for every transport cut by an 88 or a mine, the opponent sends more than 3 to keep the node alive. If R sunny continuously over a period T, then operational endurance holds. The node does not die. Weiss turned pages and set his palm flat on columns of crude numerals. The numbers read like evidence and like a sentence. Then a radio crackled in the corner and a short transmission floated through the shed, intercepted and repeated by a staff NCO spoken with the raw bluntness of operations. Fuel will reach Bastogne within 12 hours. The line dropped into the ledger and sat there, a timeline converted into a promise. 12 hours was not a moral claim. It was a pulse. He tested things with his hands. An axle lay on the bench, a used bent thing, with a grease smear where a man had fought with the bearing. Weiss lifted it and felt the grain of the steel, the elliptical wear where axles had been jammed with ice and mud. He slid a wrench over a nut found purchase and felt the tool move the metal into a shape that would hold another day. The ritual of repair became proof the object that could be fixed in 1 to 3 hours by a roadside crew could be returned to movement within the span of a staff briefing. The object that demanded a heavy repair bay would be a slow ghost for much longer. Those times matter. Allied roadside patchwork averaged roughly 1 to 3 hours. German heavy repairs typically 6 to 12 hours. The tactile fact of a bolt turning is itself an operational argument. He wrote the arithmetic into his own ledger, not as accusation, but as a summation. Flow F equals trucks per day times liters per truck. Replacement rate R equals truck/day. Interdiction rate I equals disabled day. If ER is greater than I across a sustained period, then the node's operational endurance is preserved. Plug in the example, R equals 50 trucks day, I equals 15, disabled day TL 7 days, with replacements of 50 each day and losses of 15 each day. The node steadily gains capacity rather than bleeding it. The result is endurance. The equation is cold and simple. Its conclusion leaves no rhetorical space. His confession needed no flourish. He spoke it into the shed's dim air, not to an audience, but to the ledger, to the socket, to the wrench. We were taught precision, he said, and the words came out like inventory being checked. They taught themselves to move. It was neither self-pity nor bravado. It was a factual admission that a life spent refining aim had met a system that refused to make scarcity its virtue. The final tally reads like a formula and a verdict. Consolidated metric replacement rate RR trucks/day versus interdiction rate ICE disabled day. Operational endurance holds if R, RE, continuously over T days. Illustrative example, R equals 50, trucks day I ill 15, disabled day, replacement per loss. 3.33, endurance achieved. Expressed as a resource-time ratio, the more fuel and material delivered per unit time, the less each discrete tactical success matters. Put another way, if delivered liters per day vastly exceed stored liters and expected consumption, the opposing side's local precision is converted into an accounting entry, not strategic effect. The shed settled into a hush. Outside, the motif reappeared, the whoosh of engines momentary and then gone, and Weiss let the silence that followed hold the sentence he had spoken. He closed the ledger with a slow hand and mouthed another short line, one that would fit on a scrap should he need to reread his verdict. The numbers read like a sentence. The sentence ended in numbers, it ended in movement, it ended the argument he had been trained to make. B-roll hands on ledger, numbers highlighted, slow focus pull from ledger to Weiss's face, truck axle close-up, radio with transmission, brief whoosh as numbers read aloud, then silence. As historians later observed, Bastogne was less an isolated drama of courage than a pivot in operational art, a place where the calculus of supply met the calculus of combat and the ledger, not the rifle, began to decide endurance. In the cold arithmetic that followed, commanders on both sides learned that wars could be reshaped by factories as much as by training fields. The doctrinal after-effects were direct and lasting. Allied practice of treating failures as absorbable events, build many move, many fix, fast filtered into post-war doctrine. Logistical throughput became a planned weapon. Armies reorganized supply chains, prioritized standardized, easy-to-repair platforms, and trained whole echelons of mechanics to operate forward. Doctrine manuals incorporated rhythms of rotation, moving convoys in 12 to 18-hour pulses as a deliberate operational pattern, while procurement strategy favored maintainability over marginal performance. Mechanized war after Bastogne increasingly measured success by how quickly a formation could reconstitute fighting power, not only by how well one gun crew could shoot. Weiss's arc resolves in a quieter register. He survives the winter and later, in a brief conversation beside a wartime map, folds his confession into counsel for a junior officer. Trained to be precise, he says slowly, but make your plans as if the road will outlast your aim. The line is not a renunciation of craft. He still admires the geometry of a perfect shot, but it reframes craft within a system where throughput sets the tempo. His acceptance is practical skill matters, but its strategic weight is diminished when the opponent's replacement throughput overwhelms local interdiction. The philosophical conclusion is unambiguous. Availability beat perfection because throughput converted time into sustained effect. When replacement throughput consistently exceeded interdiction, the local tactical virtues that doctrine apprised could not produce strategic collapse. Bastogne demonstrated this in plain operational terms. Convoys measured in tens of trucks per rotation delivered fuel, ammo, and mechanics in volumes that erased the tactical edge of a single well-aimed battery. State the metric simply and memorably if replacement throughput, our trucks per day, is greater than local interdiction. I disabled vehicles per day over sustained period, days, then operational endurance holds. Bastogne showed adds greater than I over T, equal to 7 days in the node, that mattered, a 7-day pulse that translated into persistent presence. Visually, the conclusion assembles like a diagram. Archival photographs dissolve into modern supply chain animations. Scholars' maps annotate routes with rotating arrows. A slow dolly pulls back from Weiss's profile to an aerial of the Ardennes, where lines of movement trace the new lesson. The motif returns one last time, a muted whoosh, now less a threat than a chord, and the scene closes on Weiss, listening ledger closed the cold on his gloves. We were taught precision. History remembered the road.